Convening this bill to the House.
I call Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm pleased to rise on behalf of New Zealand First to take a call on this, the first reading of the Fisheries, Foreign Charter Vessels and Other Matters Amendment Bill. I'd also like to join with my colleague, Honourable Damien O'Connor, in congratulating the Minister on bringing this bill to the House. New Zealand First agrees with the broad aims of this bill, and we are pleased to support it to Select Committee, where some of the minor concerns which we do have may be addressed. In addition, we hope that during the committee examination of this bill and the submissions which it will undoubtedly attract, there may be an opportunity to include the prohibition of shark finning within the bill's ambit, as we feel this is a very necessary addition to the New Zealand fisheries management, which is not covered elsewhere in the law. At present, the finning of live sharks, that's the removal of fins from sharks which are still alive, is not permitted within New Zealand's jurisdiction, but there is no prohibition on the practice of removing fins from dead sharks and then returning the remainder of the carcass to the ocean. New Zealand First regards this practice as being incredibly wasteful, particularly so in a world of growing populations and shrinking resources. Whether sharks are caught deliberately as a target species or as bycatch from other fishing activities, we believe the entire animal needs to be harvested and made use of. We feel the best way of achieving this is to require sharks to be brought ashore with fins naturally attached, as is the best practice advocated by the Shark Finning Alliance and others. Because this is a democracy which allows free speech, Mr Hinari. There is some resistance, we know, from within the fishing industry due to constraints on boat space and the limited market which currently exists for some shark species, but it is our belief that the adoption of this methodology will both allow for the better utilisation of the resource and the minimisation of the risk of live finning, which, although illegal, has the potential to still be being carried out at sea beyond the view of our limited number of inspectors and observers. In general terms, New Zealand First salutes the decision to require all vessels operating in our fishery to be New Zealand flagged, and I'm quite sure, Mr Hinari, you will be leaving the House before I do.
Order. Order. There's interjections across the crossbenches, and tone it down. I'm calling Richard Prosser. I'd like to hear what the member has to say. Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Order.
In general terms,
Order. Now that is an attack on the chair, and I'll ask the member to refrain from such comments. I'm calling Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In general terms, New Zealand First salutes the decision to require all vessels operating our fishery to be New Zealand flagged. We applaud this as the central plank of this bill, and we are pleased that it will mean that crews working on boats within our jurisdiction will receive the protection of New Zealand's labour laws and the benefits of wages guaranteed at New Zealand domestic rates. Thank you, Mr King. At present, too many vessels operating in our waters do not meet our standards of health and safety, and too many crews suffer under conditions which we would describe as manifestly insufficient, working for wages which, as other members have alluded to, border on slavery. This bill will address those realities in a very tangible way, and we applaud its construction and intent with regard to that. But we do question that it will take another 3 years for these changes to come to pass. We salute the direction that this bill is taking the New Zealand fishing industry in, but we struggle to comprehend why it will be 2016, May the 1st, 2016, before all fishing vessels operating in New Zealand waters are New Zealand flagged and subject to New Zealand laws. For 3 more years, what are currently largely foreign crews on what are largely foreign-owned charter fishing vessels that dominate our fishery will continue to have to suffer under the inadequate conditions as they exist. New Zealand First asks why it should take this long for the changes to be implemented, and we hold genuine concerns that the real reason may be pressure from within the fishing industry itself, which puts economic concerns, the costs associated with additional wages and the upgrading of vessels ahead of the welfare of crews. We are concerned by that, Mr Speaker. We'd be very concerned if that were indeed the case. We certainly hope it is not, and we look forward to having this issue examined in the Select Committee. Mr Speaker, we also have a concern that whilst the regime initiated by this bill will vastly improve conditions and pay for the crews involved, the reality is that a majority of those crews will still be foreign citizens, and the bulk of the increased pay that they receive will still disappear overseas. New Zealand First is very keen to promote the New Zealandisation of the fishing industry, and we would very much like to see an industry where the majority of boats operating are New Zealand-owned and are crewed by New Zealand citizens. We realise, however, that the demands of deep-sea fishing and the requirement to follow the tides and the weather rather than a fixed working week calendar mean that in some cases it is not always going to be possible to find New Zealand residents to fill crew requirements. And we wonder if this is one of those cases where a degree of targeted immigration may be necessary and indeed desirable in order to provide our fishery with the pool of skilled labour that it requires. But I would add that my Labour colleague Moana Mackey's suggestion of a 50% minimum quota sounds very much like an elegant partial solution to this problem. New Zealand First sees this as being one more way in which a maximum return from our fishery resource may be retained in New Zealand. Lastly, Mr Speaker, New Zealand First is eager to hear the views of the public and the fishing industry and other interested parties on these concerns and on other aspects of the bill, and we are pleased to support its timely allocation to the Primary Production Select Committee, where it can be examined and progressed and adjusted as and where necessary under the fine stewardship of Mr Ardern. New Zealand First is pleased to be voting in support of the first reading of this bill. Thank you.
I call Ian McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I just firstly want to congratulate Minister Guy on his elevation to what I consider to be the